The police and the anti-sex work people, they bill it as, oh, we're protecting you, oh, we're saving you, but they're pushing legislation that is going to make your work more dangerous in the hopes that fewer people will do it. They want everybody afraid.
Welcome back to On The Horizon. This is Melrose Michaels. I am your host, and I'm here to share what's worked for me in building my adult creator business to try to make building yours just a little bit easier. Let's get into today's episode. In a world where the rights and freedoms of performers are under constant scrutiny, new legislation and policy changes are a constant threat to adult creators. Join us today as we deep dive into the heart of what our political landscape really looks like with none other than Mike Stabile from the Free Speech Coalition. Discover what's at stake, who's affected, and why every voice matters in this pivotal moment. I did want to give you guys a heads up. We put out a tweet recently about us starting to work on a closed community for creators. We are putting all of the pieces in place before we announce and launch that community, but you can be on the lookout for that and know that we are working on it actively in the background. Now, let me introduce today's guest. So if you aren't already familiar, Mike Stabile is the Director of Public Affairs over at the Free Speech Coalition, which is a 501c6 trade association that protects the rights and freedoms of the adult industry. So when I was planning this space, it made perfect sense that Mike be the guest to bring on. So thank you, Mike, so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I am super excited. There is obviously a lot going on, and a lot of it is very scary. And I think that a lot of people who are creating and earning money in the space don't necessarily understand the ways in which this is going to affect them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why this is such important timing. So I guess to kick things off, do you want to maybe describe kind of what FSC is for anyone who doesn't know or somehow isn't really familiar with the org?
Sure. So Free Speech Coalition, FSC, has been around for over 30 years now. It was originally formed in the late 80s when the federal government, along with state vice squads and law enforcement, started raiding adult businesses. So I think that everybody who's sort of come of age during the online era, it's sort of inconceivable to think about the fact that the police might storm your business, demand your records, put you in jail, do all this. But this was happening in the late 80s and early 90s, at the time of probably the most recent porn panic other than today. So what happened, well, I won't go too far into, the dinosaurs, but, there was a moment that we're seeing in a version of today where the religious right partnered with the anti-sex work, anti-porn feminist left, and became a really significant power player in political decisions and law enforcement, something that, again, we're seeing today. When that happened, that really empowered the federal government and empowered law enforcement to start cracking down at adult businesses that had really sort of flourished. And this was obviously the VHS and magazines era. And then, the Clinton administration came in, a lot of those obscenity prosecutions sort of fell apart, and the internet came and sort of wiped out, for various reasons, a lot of the tools that these groups had. Starting about 3 years ago, we started to see that sort of unholy coalition of the radical feminist left, the evangelical right, sort of come together and focus their attentions again on porn. So to your original question, FSC was formed in that original war on porn. And then, through the years has grown and evolved and become, it was first sort of a legal defense fund, and now is more of a, advocacy and trade organization. So FSC sort of developed the first testing system for, adult performers. It has fought legislative battles. It's fought battles all the way to the Supreme Court and won, and, continues today to be the sort of the hub where the adult industry comes together, and that's both platforms and workers and lawyers and stuff to defend our rights, because there are a hell of a lot of people who would like nothing more than to see adult work criminalized again, to see it censored, and to see us put in jail. I don't mean to sound, alarmist, but these are conversations that we are seeing, today. So right now, what FSC is focused on is lots of things, but twofold. The main focuses for us right now have been the age verification laws that have been passed in the states, and then also in some in Europe that are sort of bubbling. And then banking fairness, banking financial discrimination. So obviously, anybody who works in the space sort of lives in fear of their bank account being shut down. FSC has been working with legislators and regulators and sort of others in the financial space to find solutions so that we're not being kicked out of our banks, that we have financial security, and that we're sort of working. So I think today we're probably going to focus, I imagine, primarily on the age verification laws, but that's maybe the totality of what we do, the main things we do.
Yeah, and there's no one really out there like FSC that covers so much of all of those pieces either. And I think that's why it's so unique and so important, and why I really want to draw attention to that organization specifically for creators. So to your point about age verification, because that's kind of the big thing that we're all hearing about, seeing about in passing. Can we, I guess, start there and explain kind of what that legislation looks like and how it's affecting certain states and all of that?
Yes. So, it's important to realize that you know nobody in the adult industry wants minors accessing adult content, right? It's called adult content for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And many of us are parents, or have young family members. It's not that we are, as is often sort of portrayed in the press or in some of these legislative sessions that I've attended. We're not monsters, right? We're not aliens that are divorced from ideas about what is appropriate for kids. But the age verification protocols that have been put down, or the proposals that have been made, have real problems with them. So about I'll sort of go into the sort of more recent history, which was 2022. Louisiana passed a law saying that anybody who posted or published to a website that had more than 33 and a third% material harmful to minors, essentially them meaning porn. It's a little bit more complicated, and we can get into it. But anybody who had that amount of content on their website, adult content on their website, would have to age verify every visitor. And so that law sort of went into effect in January of 2023 in Louisiana. Quickly, we saw a number of other states pick up that legislation, and basically like copy the homework. In some cases, really sort of like pulling pieces from the legislation that were specific to Louisiana, and then trying to pass it off as their own, and it didn't work. But we saw a lot of states sort of push that forward. And right now, there are 8 states that require you to verify the age of everybody who comes on that platform. And if you don't, the mechanism for enforcement, there's a couple of mechanisms, but the main mechanism for enforcement is that someone can sue you. That a parent, if a child were to access content on your site, would be able to sue you for damages. And so what we saw was, again, this was an end run around some of the protections that the internet has had, right? Meaning that you don't have to age verify the internet. Parents are responsible for, turning on filters or things like that. You don't want to turn the entire internet into the Disney Channel, right? That's not the way that things work.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's where we've got 8 bills that are 8 laws that are affected in the law. I mean, in currently, and then we have probably 30 bills that have been introduced in the past few months for this legislative session. So I've been testifying at different state houses about the issues with the law. I have been, writing letters and organizing allies and getting people involved, because as common sense as these laws seem, they actually are really dangerous, and dangerous both to consumers and creators.
Can we explain that a little bit more in depth? Because I think that the average creator who maybe doesn't follow anyone to do with policy or maybe tunes out politics. I know a lot of my own personal like sphere of people really tuned out politics after the Trump
Hmm.
administration because there was just so much all the time, that news cycle. So, like, for the average creator who maybe just hears the surface level of age verification on sites, I could see that they would maybe take that and be like, yeah, of course. Like, yeah, we don't want underage people on sites, without having the full understanding of like what that actually means and how it plays out in practice. Can you kind of talk about what's wrong with these policies? Like, what at their core is the issues with this legislation?
Sure. And I think that I want to be clear because this comes up often in these discussions. We're talking about age verification for visitors, right? For fans,
Yeah.
not for creators.
Yeah.
That's not something that FSC opposes or that the adult industry opposes, right? We've complied with that for years,
Hmm.
and sort of pioneered some of those systems. So what these laws are requiring is that anybody who comes to a site where you might sell adult content would have to essentially go through the same process that you do as a creator. And again, there are lots of different states. I'm going to generalize on these, but would have to go through something where you upload your ID and you scan your face and it compares the two, and maybe there's a background check. Maybe it checks with your credit bureau to make sure that you're over 18. You know, anybody who's gone through these processes as a creator understands how complicated they are and how often they sort of get it wrong, right? That
Hmm.
it is not. I think when you hear in the legislative hearings, and this is, I think, what a lot of people, outside the industry assume, is that they'll say, well, it's just as simple as flashing your ID for a 6 pack of beer at the liquor store. And anybody who's gone through this process in order to upload content understands that that's not actually correct, right? That it's a
Yeah.
lot more than flashing your ID, and that and then the platforms and age verification providers are a lot more complex. So there's good reason for us, for the industry, for creators, to go through that process, right? You're going to go
Hmm.
through it. You're set up for it. You have the paperwork. Like, it's a pain in the ass, but you can sort of go through it, and because you're going to sell, right? That you're going to make
Yeah.
money on that.
Yeah.
Um, for most consumers who have never done this before, it seems incredibly invasive and
Yeah.
incredibly cumbersome, right? Most people who are looking at adult content, if we're going to be frank, right, they're looking at it on their phone. They're looking at it, in their bedroom or on the toilet or whatever it is, right? Like some may be set up on a laptop in a place with good lighting and a nice camera. But a lot are not, right? A lot are sort of doing it furtively. A lot of them are, ashamed, or have a lot of shame issues and are doing it in secret. So
Mhm.
first of all, that technology of photographing your ID and uploading it and doing it in something when you're just looking to try to get off is not super easy, right? And so if a website is asking that, for a lot of times what they're going to do is they're going to go to some place that's not asking for that, right? And that may be a pirate site, that may be a site overseas, that may be a social media site that's not verifying. So
Mhm.
that the process is cumbersome, but also they're really fearful about being exposed, right? This
Yeah.
information, finding out that you are going to a kink site or a gay site or like a gangbang site or anything can really be weaponized against you, right? I mean, think
Yeah.
about it. If you are a teacher, or a legislator, or if you're going through a custody battle,
Yeah.
this is stuff that, aside from the public shaming, the embarrassment of somebody looking at your browser history, this is something that a lot of people are like, absolutely not. I'm not doing this. And so what we've seen in states that have passed this legislation is that, as much as 98% of people who are confronted with an age verification pop up say, absolutely not. I am not doing this. I'm going to go someplace where they don't verify it. And I think that is, one of the unfortunate side effects of these laws is that they encourage stolen content. They encourage the growth of pirated content because, you may go to Pornhub and find that Pornhub is, either verifying IDs or has blocked a state. And it's a sort of another
Mhm.
issue. So what you're going to do is you're going to search online and see who isn't doing this. And most of these laws only really apply to businesses that are operating in some way in the United States. They don't have a lot of effect on, on sites that are overseas, and they have almost no effect on these sites that we deal with every day in the industry, which are illegal sites, pirate sites, sites that are not taking down copyrighted content, sites that are based in, Russia or Hong Kong or the Netherlands or India, where you don't even know who the owner is of the site. They're not taking down
Mhm.
revenge porn. They're not taking down CSAM. They're certainly not going to age verify to satisfy the requirements of a state in the U.S. And so what we're seeing is that these laws actually encourage the growth of those and attack compliant sites that are working and following the law and offering a place for creators to actually make money.
And I could foresee very easily that what else is at risk here because, a lot of the, anti-adult industry organizations, whether that be like the far right or religious orgs, usually they always push things in terms of policy or even just propaganda in the name of like, human
Yeah.
trafficking or child trafficking. But when there is those bad pieces of content on the internet, they end up on those piracy sites or
Yes.
those tube sites that don't verify the creators and don't go through that process. So when they're putting in policy in place that discourages the users in the US from accessing Pornhub or websites where creators are actually compliant and have age
Hmm.
verified, they're actually increasing the traffic to bad actors that might be posting all of these terrible things.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and then that's sort of what we see. And I think a lot of our conversations, when I go in to speak with a legislature or, am talking with press, is one of the things I try to communicate is that this is doing the opposite of what you want, right? Like you don't want, I mean, again, we don't want kids on any of these sites, but you certainly don't want a kid on a site where predators are, right? Where there's low security. You don't want to fuel the growth, right? You don't want to pour gasoline on the fire that is piracy and illegal content, and that's what these laws do. I think that there are common sense ways that we can work to keep kids from accessing adult content.
Mhm.
They maybe are not as glamorous and politically exciting for these groups to pass, in part because, and I want to sort of be clear here, the groups that are passing these laws by and large don't believe that porn should exist at all. So when you look at their sort of internal conversations or their documents, and I spend a lot of time sort of in these fever swamps, right? And one of my, one of my writs at FSC is to sort of really monitor what's going on and what conversations people are having and what people are saying to legislators, and what people are saying amongst themselves in these groups. Is they basically say, we think that porn should be banned. We think that people who share porn should be put in jail. We don't think the country is there yet. We think that the court decisions, are not going to go in our favor. So we're not going to ask for that. What we're going to do is we're going to make it as dangerous as possible for people to sell content online, right? We're going to increase the liability, and we're going to slowly move in a direction with the goal of ultimately being banning adult content online, and beyond that, banning LGBTQ content. Like that's sort of, and specifically trans content, but like really anything related to gender or gender identity is their ultimate goal. Like they want the internet basically turned into a church social, right? And a very conservative church. They don't want minors or adults even to be able to access any information around sex and sexuality because they think that it is, against God's order. So a lot of this is being done in bad faith. And again, this is sort of what we try to communicate to legislators is like, hey, if you want this to be effective, you want to keep kids safe, if you want to, but you believe that like adults have a right to this, then we can work with you because we'll tell you how to do that. But the people who are pushing this legislation don't believe that. They understand that this is like the first step. There was a guy recently who said to a legislator, one of the groups from the American Principles Project, which is really the sort of anti-trans group that's backing a lot of this legislation and drafting it, said to a legislator, because the legislator brought up, and this was a conservative legislator, he said, this is like, listen, kids are going to get around this with VPNs. Like, this is not
Mhm.
addressing any overseas site. This isn't addressing social media. Social media sites are largely exempted. Like, this is just a bad law that's going to be ineffective. And the guy said, well, that's just the first step. Yes, we're going to pass this. And when this is ineffective, then we're going to get, and I think that, he said, whoever's elected in November, we want them we want the Department of Justice to start seizing domains, right? So
Wow.
this is they're saying the quiet part out loud, and that is that's very helpful and also very scary, right? Because you understand what they want to do.
Yeah, they're kind of showing their hand a little
Yeah.
bit. If you're enjoying this podcast episode so far, please take one moment to share it with another one of your adult content creator friends, because you know what the rule is here. We do not gatekeep, and we want to make as many adult creators' businesses as easy as possible. And you sharing this episode with them might do exactly that. Thanks so much in advance. So, I guess I'm kind of want to dive more into the things that you're hearing, because I find that super interesting. A lot of creators, performers, even platform owners, I would imagine, don't get to hear kind of the language or the exchanges that are going on in Washington inside those kinds of rooms that you're in attendance in and having these conversations in. I know that we had a recent win in New Hampshire.
Hmm.
I was reading that on Twitter from FSC. But so what are those conversations like? You gave us a bit right now, but what is kind of the legislations feel about all of this? And like, what are the exchanges being had? Like, obviously what you mentioned, like it's ineffective. It's not even going to cause or give you the effect that you're asking for. But what else is being said? Because it sounded like in New Hampshire, you guys had kind of support, like more support than I would have expected.
Well, I'll tell you, when we started out in New Hampshire, and it like, it wasn't just us. FSC was sort of very active. ACLU was there, and then there were performers and performer groups who also sort of came out. But what you hear, I'll tell you, at these hearings, is the legislator will present the bill. It says, listen, any website with more than 33 and a third percent material harmful to minors, will have to age verify, and if they don't, they will, a parent could sue them if a minor accesses their content, right? And they
Mhm.
say that thing. It's just as same as flashing your ID at a liquor store. We age verify everywhere else. Why don't we age verify online? We're just making this very simple change to the internet, right? And then what you'll see is you'll have a parade of people testifying in favor of the bill. And what they'll say is porn is dangerous to humanity. Porn is addictive. It's destroying lives. It's destroying marriages. It is, it should be punished by the Department of Justice. It's causing trafficking. It's causing child abuse. It's causing domestic violence. All this stuff that is not actually supported by science or data. But they will come in and they'll just sort of like, often these are faith-based groups, but often there are, the anti-sex work feminists will sort of come in and support as well, and it will be a parade of horrors, right?
Mhm.
And often sort of anecdotal stuff you'll see in conversations, and with very little to back it, right? One thing that I'll hear a lot is there's a story where they'll say, I talked to one girl, and she was just 12 years old or 14 years old, and she was dating a boy, and their first kiss, he tried to choke her and kill her because he had seen BDSM, and he said, I think that's normal. Like, sort of these things that, like,
Wow.
you're like, that I will bet 99.9% that did not happen. Right. Or it didn't
Yeah.
happen that way. Like, that's not the way, like, or if it did, it wasn't the result of porn. Like, that there were other issues there. Right. Like, maybe he was
Mhm.
listening to Andrew Tate. This is a, like, there are other, like, forces. And I think that creators know this as well, right? You exist online. You see the sort of horrible stuff that is discussed, both in terms of you and in terms of, you know, uh, gender identity and sexuality, right? There's, like, the
Mhm.
internet is full of disgusting ideas as to what should happen, often to women or trans or queer people, but just in
Yeah.
general. So that's sort of what will happen. And the legislators, who, often at this point, you're sort of dealing with people in a committee. So they're before the Judiciary Committee, they present the bill, and then the committee members will sort of ask questions, about the bill. Is this constitutional? How to do this? And in New Hampshire, just as an example, I will say that, you know, of the committee, which was maybe a dozen or so people, I would say all but maybe two were in favor of the bill. And they would ask questions like, would this affect, a mom and pop restaurant that offers Wi-Fi, or, which it doesn't, right? It affects websites specifically. Or they'd say,
Yeah.
how do we know that kids can't get around this? But mostly what they say is, I think this is a great bill. This seems really simple. This seems like we should be doing this. Porn is terrible. It is an abomination. We need to do something about this. So you'll sort of see those sorts of questions, and then you'll get, if you're lucky, opposition voices, right? So in the case of New Hampshire, we had the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. They sort of came in and said, "Hey, listen, this is unconstitutional," and these decisions around age verification on the internet go back to the early days of the internet. The Supreme Court has ruled that you cannot create unreasonable burdens for adults where there are less restrictive measures, such as filters on your laptop or phone, device level filters, right? The Supreme Court said we can't dumb down the entire internet, right? Any more than we can dumb down the rest of the world. We can't make the entire world kid safe. Yes, there's an interest that we should do this, but there are other measures to do it that don't violate, our constitutional right to access legal content. And I think that it's important to realize that people talk about the First Amendment, it's your right to free speech. It's also your right to consume ideas and access that speech. So what these laws often do is they sort of limit that. So you'll see the ACLU sort of testified. ALA one, I think that's how you pronounce it, which is based in New Hampshire, sort of came out and spoke and talked about their issues with the law. And FSC had sort of we weren't allowed to testify, right? We weren't allowed to testify in New Hampshire. We weren't from New Hampshire, and they didn't allow remote testimony. So we had sent a letter to all the legislators saying, "Hey, here's the issues with this bill. We want to do the same thing you do, but this is ineffective, dangerous, and it's going to, and unconstitutional." But we listened to the hearing, and we couldn't believe how much bad information was there, right? So, for instance, with the ACLU, one of the legislators asked them a question and said, "So let me get this right. You want to legalize child pornography?"
Wow.
Like they don't understand the technology, they don't understand the law. Most state legislators are part-time legislators, right? They're just there for a few weeks or a month or so. In the early part of the year, they have other businesses. They have other careers, right? So they're not fully concentrated, and so and they're often very ideological. So they just say, yes, this is a good bill. It's coming from the right. We like it. We're going to pass it. So FSC sort of then followed up and said, "Hey, listen, we sent you the original letter, but here were some of the things that came up in that hearing that are just wrong that we're going to explain to you about. Here's what the issue is. No, we don't want child pornography. Blah 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 blah." And so, that hearing went on, and we didn't hear anything back. Right? People don't often reach out to the porn industry. But then when the
Yeah.
vote happened, it was 16-2, and they opposed the legislation. So that was a huge victory, right? It wasn't all us. Like there were obviously other people involved, but I think that that's the value of, if we had not shown up, if we had not made those cases, right? And by we I mean us as the industry and us as sort of opponents and of these laws, I think that it would have passed easily, right? That's what we saw last year with some of these bills. It's just that, they seem common sense. They're presented as common sense. They don't raise any of the issues, right? The proponents of the bills, and so they pass. And that's the value of an organization like FSC. When ACLU goes in, they talk very narrowly about the Constitution, but they don't know how the industry works. They've never gone through age verification, right? They don't know what the reality is. And I think that what FSC can bring in is and say, "Hey, listen, we've tried this. This is what the reality is. This is what it's going to do." And it sounds good on paper, but it's going to be a mess.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about specifically with age verification, is it 33% of the site? Is that
Yeah.
right? Okay. So my concerns when I hear that is like, how does that impact something like in OnlyFans? Because like OnlyFans has a lot of adult content. I don't know the percentage, but I'm curious as to if that's been discussed at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's funny. OnlyFans has actually been in support of some of this legislation elsewhere, right? This is happening in the UK. This is happening in France and Germany and other places as well. And that is a difference of opinion. That OnlyFans is not a free speech coalition member. And as you know, they don't necessarily have the strongest relationship with the community that makes the money. So yeah, I won't get too much into that, but like they also have a different business model, right? So all of their stuff is behind a paywall, which is not compliant with most of the US laws, right? You still would have to do age verification for a consumer, but it might make them a little bit less of a target. And I think that what you see in the space with platforms and creators, because these also affect individual creators, what we've seen in some of the other countries that have passed legislation like this, is that they go after creators individually, is that it's going to have different effects on different types of businesses. Businesses are going to try to figure out ways in which to lower their risk. I think one of the things that concerned me with OnlyFans and their sort of endorsement of some of these laws in the UK was that you may have a business where you have everything behind a paywall and like you may be covered. But most of your creators are advertising on sites like Twitter and Reddit. They're generating the traffic that is coming to make those purchases. And the people like the UK law affects Twitter and Reddit, right? The US laws don't quite yet. They plan on that sort of next. But if you put these age verification requirements on Twitter and Reddit, where a lot of anonymous conversations happen, right? Where a lot of, beyond the adult content, right? People are discussing politics, people are discussing their jobs, they're doing AMAs, they don't want to be identified, right? Twitter and Reddit may very well say, you know what, we're getting rid of adult content. We're going to become more like Instagram because we don't want to do this age verification because it's too invasive. And so I think that that's sort of where I want creators to pay more attention to this because platforms may very well cut deals, right? But the power of creators comes from their ability to market directly to fans, and a lot of what these laws do are limit the spaces where people are able to do that. Well, a lot of what these laws do are encourage deplatforming of sex and sex work, right? Or censorship of posts or things like that. So I think that we need to be engaged in this. Like we need to understand, and more importantly, we need to communicate with fans about this because they're affected as well. And they,
Yeah.
for the most part, don't understand what's happening or why it affects them. And that is, that's also our secret power.
And so, because some of this stuff I've heard, so the policy, so I think it was in Germany, where they were age verifying the users on the sites, which obviously, related to this conversation. And I know some of my own fans on OnlyFans specifically have age verified and almost, kind of pivoted over to a creator profile on the site, even though they're not actively creating content by any means. But I don't know if they were prompted necessarily to do that, but it kind of felt like that per our conversation. So like I see more of that happening, and it makes me think that this is, platforms like OnlyFans or fan site type of platforms kind of putting up safeguards.
Yeah.
Is that a safe assumption?
I think so. I think that a lot of people attempted to comply with some of these laws, right? And again, every country is different, right? So some countries in Europe have a long history of sort of digital IDs, right? So it's not a huge jump sometimes for someone, in Germany perhaps, right, to upload their ID, right, or to use a digital ID to access a site. That it's a little bit more in what they're already doing for banks or groceries or things like that, right? That technology already exists. That doesn't necessarily happen in every country, and I think the U.S. is a good example, and obviously a huge market where that doesn't. And so, what you're asking for is and there aren't as many privacy protections in the U.S. So, for instance, these laws sort of prohibit the age verification provider from keeping the data, for the people who are, requesting that they be able to access, Pornhub or OnlyFans or whatever else it is. But they don't ban the government from keeping that data, right? And I think that without a national privacy law, without data protection, a lot of people are going to continue to be concerned that yes, this is going to be used against them, right? Somebody is going to subpoena their history. How many times did you ping the database to make sure that you were legally of age? Where were you pinging it from? What sites were you accessing? That stuff is incredibly dangerous, and we're also seeing in the U.S., I got another report last week from somebody selling this data online, right? So someone was selling in a Telegram group, sort
Wow.
of basically 2.5 gigabytes of data that featured age verification, right? So what, like both creators and fans. So what would happen is you might get a link, maybe it's a phishing link in your email or in a DM or something like that, saying, "Hey, I need you to verify to access my content." That consumer goes and verifies, does the process, and the fisher, the hacker, sort of records that video, records their identification, and then leaves the camera on to watch them masturbate and records that. And then
Wow.
uses that information. This was what they were selling. They were selling these sort of video things, right? You could have their ID, you could have, their age verification image, and you can have an image of them masturbating so you can extort them, right? So that's sort of the type of criminal activity these laws are putting forth.
Wow, that's crazy to hear that that's going on already
Yeah,
because we're talking about it because there's such a lag, right, between when policy gets put in place or legislation actually goes into effect versus whatever the problem they're quote unquote trying to
yeah,
solve. So to know that the bad actors are already out there exploiting this, and then you have that to present to policymakers, like, this is actually already happening.
yeah,
This is why we can't move forward and continue this because it's opening up this whole other, industry, black market industry
yeah.
to ruin people's lives.
The problem is that for a lot of the legislators who are sort of pushing this legislation, right? A lot of the ones from the right and a little bit from the left, they're sort of like good, right? They're like, we want to make it dangerous for people to access this content. We want to make it dangerous for people to sell this content. Like, we don't think anybody. I mean, if you think about like the quote unquote anti-trafficking groups, right? The faith-based groups that don't believe that sex work is work and that everything is coerced and trafficking, you know, they push for legislation and policies that make it more dangerous to be a sex worker, and they're pushing for legislation and policies that make it more dangerous to view adult content because they think that anything that dissuades people from being a sex worker or consuming adult content is ultimately godly and rightly and good, right? And that's sort of like there's a that is the devil, and whatever we can do to sort of get people will get them closer to being saved. So I don't think that, like, we do bring this up, right? We do talk about these issues, and there are legislators, and obviously we look at every state as different and figure out sort of where we can make a difference, and all of that. But yeah, I think that a lot of them, frankly, are like, yeah, that's great. Let's make it worse. I mean, if you look at like the anti-sex work legislation that gets pushed, right, where they make it so that you can't verify clients, right?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't help anybody except the police and the anti-sex work people. They bill it as, oh, we're protecting you, oh, we're saving you, but they're pushing legislation that quite frankly is going to make your work more dangerous in the hopes that fewer people will do it.
It's terrifying to me because it's to claim that you're doing something that is for the betterment of people while putting people in danger to innately, dissonant ideas.
Yeah, or you look at like abortion, right? You look at reproductive rights. What if they have at every point made it more difficult and more dangerous? So now you have people in these states that can't get an abortion even though the fetus is dead, even though it's endangering their health because doctors are afraid they're going to get sued. I think these are the models that the anti-porn bills have been built on, right? They want everybody afraid. They want
Yeah.
people to say, oh, you know what? They want Reddit and Twitter to be like, you know what? I don't want to get sued. Let's just get rid of adult. Because right now there's an incentive for Reddit or Twitter to use adult, right? We are an active part of their platform. We bring in a lot of consumers, right? We are a strong community. There's that. If the evangelicals can make it so that it's that balance tips in their favor and it's not worth it to host adult content anymore, yeah, then they'll get rid of us.
Yeah. I mean, that's so much easier than trying to moderate or police or
Yeah,
meet the standards that are being unreasonably set.
yeah.
Is there any other policy aside right now from the age verification stuff that you think creators should be like top of mind of or informed about?
I will say that there are a lot of bills that are being put in, and this is new this year. We didn't see this so much last year, that outrightly say we want to ban adult content. So Oklahoma has introduced bills that basically make it illegal to send us it so much of it as a sext, right? You can't
Oh wow.
like they basically are like the only people who can distribute explicit content are married couples to one another. That's essentially what the bill says, right? It's
So
uncon.
the only people who aren't doing it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that there's that, right? They've started showing their head as to what the next step is, right? They've gotten some of these bills passed. They're going to get some more passed this year. Um, they're starting to be like, okay, we've made those inroads. Now let's start doing what we really want, right? Which is sort of banning these things. There's one that I saw in Utah. There's a hearing actually today over a bill that would require anybody sharing adult content online. So that means you posting to Twitter, that means a fan retweeting something would have to preface it with a warning that says obscene content is sort of harmful to your health. State of Utah warning, right? That sort of thing. Like again, it's unreasonable. There's no way to to do that. Um, like to put a pop up, right? You can't do that on Twitter, and even if you would, it'd be how many times would you have to do it? And it's also like factually untrue, right? They're trying to say that pornography is harmful. The science doesn't support it, right? And Texas has a similar law that sort of passed in terms of adult sites, which says you have to post every time you post adult content. You have to have a warning that says adult content is known to cause addiction and mental illness and brain damage and fuels trafficking and child rape and things like that. So they're trying to sort of come up with these other laws, again, that make people feel shame about their sexuality, about consuming content online. And we all know that so many people already are conflicted, right? They already feel embarrassed about
Yeah.
masturbating or things like that. So there's lots of things like that. I think we're seeing a lot of the influence of the sort of groups like NoFap and Andrew Tate and the sort of the alpha men, the semen retention that like this is, that we want to make people feel embarrassed about porn and we want to create
Yeah.
legal liabilities for them to distribute it.
It's interesting because it's reminiscent of like the tobacco era, like when they finally had to put tobacco warnings, like a general surgeon warning, I believe, on the cigarette
Mhm.
packs. But that was backed by like science and data versus
Yeah, and that's what they say. They will often say, "Oh, well, cigarettes have to do that," and this is as big as the cigarette industry. And I'm sorry that there's not any evidence that jerking off, like causes any issues, right? This is something that goes back to the church for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? They've tried to say that masturbation will make you go blind, right? That masturbation is going to grow hair on your palms, right? Or that it's going to make you hysterical, or that it's going to make you a loose woman, or whatever it is, right? This is not new. The arguments are not new. They're just adopted for the mainstream. And so they create these things and they say, oh, well, cigarette warnings have to have this warning. And you're like, well, one, that's backed by science. Two, this is speech, right? This is our right to talk about these things, to talk about our sexuality. Like it's not a harmful chemical. Like as much as you want to try to equate it to that, it's just not the
yeah.
same thing. And I think that they're using a playbook that depends on people not being educated about it. Because again, when you're talking about cigarettes or when you're talking about kids for accessing adult content, flashing an ID, all of that sounds really sensible. And I think that it's really hard when you're talking with a family member or somebody at a dinner party or somebody online to make that argument. And I think that what we're trying to do at FSC, and I'm so glad that I was able to come on here as well, is sort of talk about it so that people are a little bit more aware, because even for people in the industry, a lot of this sounds reasonable. And I think that that's where the danger lies.
Yeah, 100%. Something you mentioned earlier was about kind of it for creators, even informing their fans about, kind of these things going on. what would your suggestion be in terms of like what to say to a fan to inform them and kind of make them understand the climate?
So I think that, like, fans are actually in an interesting place, right? Because they're the ones that have to verify. And I think that where I would probably start, if we're talking about age verification, is I would always start with, we don't think that minors should access adult content either, right? And then there's plenty of reasons, and I've seen reasons, discussions online from, say, findoms who say, well, I don't want minors accessing my content, right? I don't want them. From an ethical perspective, don't want them accessing it. And age verification sounds good to me. And I think that's understandable, right? Nobody wants that. So I think that with that conversation with the fans, say, yes, we want to do this too, but if we're going to do it, it has to be effective, right? It can't create these dangerous risks for legal adults, and it can't fuel the growth of illegal sites, right? If it's not going to have an effect, if you're going to pass a law and all it is going to do is drive the growth of pirated content and illegal content, if all it's going to do is sort of push kids to get VPNs or, push them onto social media where they're more likely to stumble upon adult content, right? I mean, this is one of the things too, is that when you're dealing with, they don't want kids. One of the things is they don't want kids to accidentally see adult content, and that makes sense as well. But what these laws do by sort of going after adult sites is they increase the incidence that they're going to see it on Twitter or Reddit, because that's the only place that people have to go and market, and people get more desperate. So I think that the conversation is, yes, we believe that as well. However, these laws are really dangerous. They're really dangerous for your privacy, right? Like, what is going to happen with your data and what sites you went to, and your name and ID. There's always going to be the potential that these databases are going to get hacked, and there's also the ability that your data is going to be sold. There's going to be identity theft, and so coming at it from a solution-oriented standpoint, say, yeah, we want to fix this too. However, there are better ways to do it. Is where I would start.
Absolutely. And then I want to also ask just one more question in terms of like how creators can get involved in kind of like supporting and, FSC, and also making sure that the wrong policies or wrong legislation or bad legislation isn't getting passed. Like, what can we as creators do? How can we help aside from educating the fans?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, like, you may have seen that there, I would follow FSC Army. That's where a lot of the action alerts go out. I'm at Mike Stabile on Twitter. I talk about this incessantly. It really has swallowed my life, to my boyfriend's chagrin. Basically, what we're looking for are creators in different states, right? We can help you testify in the legislature if you want. We can help you. We want to know how these laws are affecting you. But by and large, we also want you to get this information out to fans so that, in places that are looking to consider this legislation, we want fans writing into their legislators and saying, hey, listen, it doesn't even have to be about porn, but to say, listen, I have real concerns about privacy, right? And I think that these bills are dangerous. Those really affect the legislature, right? They really be like, oh, this is not, because I will tell you, the people who are passing this legislation are coming in and saying, everybody wants this. 80% of people think that this is a good idea. And that's largely because most people don't. I mean, I think the studies are skewed, but I think that also most people don't understand the downsides, right? So they think, oh, this makes sense, but they don't understand, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. So I think that, signing up as, for action alerts at FSC, monitoring these accounts, and particularly if you are in a state and you say, oh, you know what, I'm in Oklahoma, I'm in Montana, I am in, in this state. How can I help, right? You can write, and we're happy to work with you and sort of show you what the process is like. But, I'm talking to a performer today who is interested in writing an op-ed in Utah. We have another performer in Utah who has joined us anonymously, right, as a John Doe in our lawsuit against the state of Utah. We're suing in Utah and Louisiana and Texas and some more states to come. But to say, listen, I now have to use a VPN to get around this because Pornhub is blocked in my state, right? I can't access this. I now have to go around this. This is somebody who is selling, basically erotica, through online. So I think that like that's what we need. We need sort of more voices. We need to understand sort of what you're seeing, and also we need to understand sort of what your fans are saying. We're going to be doing in the coming later this month. We're going to be doing. We've done some media training. So Free Speech Coalition on YouTube. You can see the first. But we're going to be doing another one of media training for advocacy that focuses a little bit more on things like talking to a legislator. What can you expect? Like, what are they going to ask you? How can I keep my sort of anonymity? These are all things that are important. What is it like to testify at a hearing? Because we need more voices. There are hundreds of thousands of adult creators in the US, right? If not millions. And there are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of adult fans, right? That is a huge number. And I think that we are bigger than the other side. We're more powerful. And I will tell you, we are smarter and know the issue better. And I think the only question that we have is sort of like how to harness that most effectively.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. So everybody listening, if you aren't already, make sure you're following at FSC Army so you can get involved, see these action alerts, make sure that if you know other creators that are going to be impacted or are in these states when you see action alerts, make sure you tag them. That's like our superpower in the adult kind of creator landscape is how we can use social media, how we can contact each other and kind of move things and make change. So I think this is where some of our strengths certainly can lie. Thank you, Mike, so much for joining us. I really appreciate you. If you want to just shout out your socials again so everyone can follow you, you are my favorite person to follow. So.
I'm a little bit of a chicken little, but I also rage against the machine. So I am at Mike Stabile. So that's, I mean, you obviously are following me on Twitter. So at MikeStabile, B as in boy, ILE. That's my main source. I mean, Instagram is just vacation photos and things like that. But yeah, I think that Twitter is really where I interact the most. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear sort of what you're experiencing. If you're like, hey, listen, I have a huge TikTok following and I want to deal with this, but I don't know the information. Talk to me. I will get on the phone. I will explain to you sort of what the thing is. I'll provide you resources. I will provide you links to articles and things that you can read. I can help with that. If you want to write an op-ed, if you just want to harness your fan base and send something out, I am happy to. As you know, Melrose, I like to talk and I like to talk to people and I like to hear what people are experiencing. So any interest in getting involved, I'm happy to do individual media training. So you're like, I want to reach out to press or I want to be a source or this has happened to me. How do I get my story out? All of that is, what FSC does and what I do.
Absolutely, guys. So make sure you're following Mike. Reach out if you have anything to share, if you want to get involved, if you want more information, like you said, we can be sharing this stuff on our socials. We can use our platforms to like educate fans, inform people, have these conversations. I think that's really powerful. So thank you again, Mike, so much for joining us. And I will start to wrap up this space.
I appreciate it so much, and I just want to say I'm so glad to be here with all of you. You're excellent.
This has been really cool. All right, guys, I'm going to start to wrap up this space. As many of you have seen, we have begun to put out a bunch of new content over on our YouTube channel. So if you aren't subscribed already, please make sure you do so at youtube.com/SWCEO. Make sure your notifications are on so that you never miss a course or any of the information we put out. Our recent video is probably one of the most controversial we've actually ever covered. I kind of talked about both sides of the AI conversation, and I tested Slushy's AI profile with Sophie D, and I make some predictions about what I kind of expect to see from AI in the future as it pertains to adult creators. So our SWR CEO exclusive video about the future of AI in the adult industry is live. As always, huge thank you to everyone subscribed to our Telegram bot already. If you haven't already heard, we released a Telegram bot that essentially sends your daily dose of inspiration and all the captions that you need for your feed, PPV Live messages, clip stories, etc. The ideas are researched to be highly desirable for what fans are currently seeking, and all of the captions are optimized with calls to action to increase your earning and unlock potential with each one. If you are not an active Telegram user, you can always get the PDF versions of our content info and captions over on our shop on the website sexworkceo.com/shop. We recently launched our store with all of the same content and caption ideas that go out on the Telegram bot, but if you prefer the PDF downloadable version, you can get that on our website. There's also free scripts and PDFs available there for you as well. So if you want to get a taste of that without even spending a dime, make sure to check out our website. I will want to take kind of this opportunity to draw your attention and remind all of you guys listening about my other company, actually co-founded with Mike Stabile, SWR Data, in case you're not familiar. So SWR Data is on a mission to survey the adult creators like you. We want to hear your feedback about the challenges you face and how the adult industry can better serve your needs. Our goal is to collect your experiences, opinions, and observations about the current state of the adult industry. We'll use this data to advocate for the necessary changes to make it a better place for us, the creators. The reality is, a lot of the people in power have never been creators and simply don't have the lens to know what our needs are. SWR Data is that lens. However, we can't do it alone and genuinely need your help. For that reason, we're inviting any creator who's willing to participate in our qualifying survey, which helps us understand your expertise as an adult creator. By taking our survey, we can then start to send you future paid surveys with our ultimate aim for the CEO squad to have an additional income stream through SWR Data's surveys alone. Your experience as a creator is valuable, and we think it's time you get paid for it. Let us know if you are interested, and then we will DM you the qualifying survey link so you can join us in this mission. Lastly, but most importantly, I do want to emphasize that all the information SWCEO puts out is free because we do believe in this idea that the more financially successful creators are, the more resources we'll have as a community to do things like lobby Congress, impact policy, organize, and more. So if you found value in what you heard here today or the tweets you've engaged with, please, please, please consider sharing this to your own feeds and your own socials to make this journey easier for your own adult creator friends. Our only ask is that you retweet our stuff so that we can help as many people as humanly possible. Thank you so much in advance. This is going to bring us to the end of today's Twitter space. Huge thank you for everyone that joined. Huge thank you to Mike Stabile again. Remember, all of these spaces are turned into blog posts available over on our website, sexworkceo.com/blog. So if you heard anything here and you want to revisit any of the ideas, you can check back in about a week to see this in blog format over on our website. Thank you guys again for joining me today, CEO Squad, and I will see you 1 week from now.
It would be absolutely incredible if you rated this podcast 5 stars and left a little review. We want to get this podcast to as many adult creators as possible, and you taking a second to leave a couple stars and a review really helps us do that. Thanks so much.